Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Welcome, everybody, to the Mormon Newscast. I'm Bill Reel, and I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Rebecca Biblioteca from the Mormonish Podcast. How are you? And Radio Free Mormon. And RFM, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. Radio Free Mormon from too many podcasts to number.
There is too many at this point, huh? You're having a lot of fun with that, though. Glad both of you are joining with me tonight. Folks, we're glad each of you are here for episode number 18 of the Mormon Newscast. It is April 22nd, 2024. And let me put up on the screen the layout here for tonight. So the stories we're going to talk about, RFM is going to share with us some new developments in regards to the Vegas Temple, in regards to steeple height as a symbol of the faith. Is that such a thing? And then Rebecca will take us through who wears LDS garments less, men or women, and we'll finish off with a story about the light in their eyes, or the Mormon Glow, as we've been trained to think about. So
not to be confused with the Mormon Afterglow.
No, there's the Afterglow CD, which was the great music that we all sort of listened to as well. RFM, take us into our main story tonight on the steeple height as a symbol of faith.
Thank you, Bill. Well, this is a story that was covered over at Mormonish by Rebecca, I think, last week. And what I did was I was looking at it today, getting some slides in order. I started doing a little bit more research, and I found out a number of things that I think are very interesting and which I think are being broadcast for the first time this evening. But in order to get there, so this will take probably about 30 minutes. So I hope that you will allow me that time. I guarantee you that by the time we get to the end of it, you're going to go, OMG, you have got to be freaking kidding me. Okay, that's my guarantee. We'll see if it upholds. All right. We start with the Mckin, Texas LDS Temple, which has not been built yet. This is a drawing. A site has been selected for it. And the site is, of course, in Mckin, Texas. Now, Mckin, Texas is a little town that's north of Dallas. It's part of what is sometimes called the Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex. It's all a bunch of towns that have run together as they've grown. So Dallas, of course, has had its temple since 1985. Now they're getting another one, basically, is what this is. It's just a little bit north. So it features a 107-foot top steeple and 173-foot 8-inch top spire. That is the total height of the spire. It's one of these very large spires that are causing a lot of concern among neighborhoods where these temples are being planted. So let's go to the next one. Now, in the last few days, stake presidencies in this temple district for the Mckin Temple, I think, takes up 5 stakes. And stake presidencies have been sending out letters to their members, asking the members to write letters to the planning commissions who are in charge of approving or disapproving the temples for whatever plot of land they happen to be on, and whether they run into zoning ordinances, which might say, no, you can't have that temple here because it's too tall, especially with that spire, with that steeple you've got. But they are directing their members to write letters of support for the temple to the people who are going to be making the decisions. And what they're saying now, very interestingly, we've got 2 of these letters, is they want them to focus on the steeple of the temple as an integral part of the religious exercise and religious observance of the Latter-day Saints. Now, this is, of course, news to me and anybody else who's been a member of the church for over 5 minutes, because never since 1978, and in all my research that I've done before that time, have I ever heard any general authority or anybody anywhere in the LDS church talk about the steeple of a temple as having anything to do with the religious practice of what goes on inside the temple. So let's go to this first letter to LDS members in the Mckin Temple district. This is in the Sherman, Texas stake, one of those 5 stakes I talked about. Sherman, Texas stake. The following message is being sent to members of the Sherman stake at the request of Elder Cannon our Area 70. So this is GA directed. Brothers and sisters, we've been asked to help support the approval of the plan to build the McKinney, Texas Temple in Fairview, Texas by writing emails of support. We need the voting body to hear many voices of support with personal reasons why you want this temple here in our community. It doesn't have to be long. Brief is actually better. Be sincere and share from the heart, as long as you say the things that we want you to say. Okay, I added that part. We don't want these to seem scripted, because then it would look like it was an orchestrated effort, which is what it is. But we want it to not look like what it is in order to fool the people that we're trying to get to vote for us. Okay, next one. This is the next part of that same email. Please email the planning manager. And I'm sure they give the email address there. It's been whited out. Subject line: resident in support for those who live in Fairview, or neighbor in support for those who live in a nearby town who are in the Temple district. In your email, you could answer a couple of the following questions. Not scripted though. Why you're excited for and support a temple in Fairview, and what it will mean to you personally and allow you to worship God / practice your faith. How houses of worship in a community, those who attend, to be better people and improve their lives, and therefore improve the community. How it will bless your family. While we want you to express your feelings in your own words, some key concepts would be helpful to the approval process. Well, what would those key concepts be, Stake President? A key message needs to be on the importance of the temple and how it allows you to worship as you choose. Okay, freedom of religion, religious observance, to practice your faith, religious observance, and that the building itself is a symbol of your faith. And then in parentheses, they helpfully including the steeple. Well, I'm sure this is a surprise to all the people who are getting it, but yes, I'm imagining they will do as directed and talk about how important that steeple is as a symbol of their faith. Now, if we go to the next one, which is going to be more explicit on the temple scene, the second letter to the LDS members in the McKinney Temple District, this from the Frisco, Texas stake. And here is their much lengthier email. Under the name the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it says Frisco, Texas stake, Frisco stake family. It was announced recently that the Frisco stake will be one of 5 stakes assigned to the new temple district for the McKinney, Texas Temple when it is built. This is exciting news for our stake. We have been asked by Elder Jonathan Cannon, same GA, our local Area 70, and the Area Communications Committee to send the attached letter to members of our stake. So once again, this is coming from above. This isn't being generated or thought of in the stake level. It's coming from higher realms of glory. We would invite you to read the attached letter and follow the inspiration and direction you receive by the power of the Holy Ghost. The temple is the house of the Lord, and he will guide us in our efforts to support his work here in our area. Thank you for your faith and support, Frisco Stake Presidency. And so now here apparently comes the letter that they've been asked to share, which presumably came from Elder Cannon. Going to the top of the middle paragraph, brothers and sisters, we've been asked to help support the approval of the plan to build the McKinney, Texas Temple in Fairview, Texas by writing emails of support. We need the voting body to hear many voices of support with personal reasons why you want this temple here in our community. It doesn't have to be long. Brief is actually better. Be sincere and share from the heart. We don't want these scripted. That part sounds similar. We would invite you to email Planning Manager Israel Roberts in the following pattern. 1, subject line, resident in support. That's going to be the same as in the prior email. 2, in your email, you could answer a couple of the following questions. Why you're excited for and support a temple in Fairview and what it will mean to you. How houses of worship in a community benefit the whole community, and how the temple helps those who attend to be better people and improve their lives, etc. Now, at the top of the third paragraph is where things really get interesting. While we want you to express your feelings in your own words, some key concepts would be helpful to the approval process. A key message needs to be on the importance of the temple and how it allows you to worship as you choose to practice your faith, and that the building itself is a symbol of your faith, including the steeple, if you feel to be specific in that regard. Well, we'll be specific for you in the next paragraph. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. That's capital R, capital O, religious observance. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Steeples point toward heaven and serve the purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. By the way, these sentiments have never appeared to my knowledge in any conference talk or any church manual, ever. All right. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me. Please do not copy and paste these exact words and phrases in your messages. No, then it would look like we are orchestrating this. Please use your own as you prayerfully feel impressed to do so. At this time, the project will come for a vote by the Planning and Zoning Commission on Thursday, May 9th. We also would like to invite you to consider including the temple and the Fairview town leaders and residents in your fast this Sunday and on May 5th. So it looks like this was written the week before Fast Sunday in April. Thank you for your willingness to help prepare our community for another house of the Lord. I think that's a reference to the Dallas Temple from 1985. Tremendous for another house of the Lord, in other words. Tremendous blessings will come to us and our neighbors through our temple worship. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Melissa McNeely at, and then whatever that was. Okay. So, including the steeple. By the way, I want to thank Rebecca for letting me pick and choose out of her slides that she used in her Mormonish presentation. It really helped. Not all of these are from there, and they're in a bit of a different order, but I couldn't have done it without you, Rebecca. You're the best. Including the steeple, that is a quotation from that prior letter. And this is what it says in highlight. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Steeples point toward heaven and serve a purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. Now, you may be wondering why it is, not only that I read it twice, but why it's in there at all, when we've never heard any message like that from any church leader in the entire history of the church, of which I'm aware. And the reason now has to do, first off, it's not true. All right. And when I joined the church in 1978, there were, I believe, 15 temples in the world. That's how much things have changed in the intervening years. But even then, out of the top 15, the first 15 temples, there were 3 that had no steeples. And those were Alberta or Cardston, the Hawaii Temple, and the Mesa, Arizona Temple. Those are all older temples, and none of them have steeples. Since that time, they have added 5 temples that have no steeples: Paris, France; Meridian, Idaho; Tucson, Arizona; Hong Kong, China; Lima, Peru. Okay, so they have a bunch of temples with no steeples. So this is really, really a bad fact for the LDS Church as it tries to convince its members, and through them, the Planning Commission, that this is something that is part of the religious observance of Mormons, is having a big old steeple on the temple. Moving on from that, what I did was I wanted to go and find out why it was that this was going on. Now, Rebecca had already figured out that this has to do with a law that was passed about 25 years ago. It's a federal law. It is called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Yeah, that's a mouthful. So they abbreviate it to its initials, and it's like RLUIPA, which they call RLUPA. Okay, it's the RLUPA is the act. And instead of going to the entire act itself and reading through it, what I did was I located on the internet a Department of Justice synopsis of the act, which we have here. And it's an 11-page document. And the first 3 pages is the synopsis of the act. And you can see this was dated June 13, 2018, when the Department of Justice released this. And then it goes on to have Q&A about different elements of the act. And they have questions and answers on the land use provision of this act. So you see there's 1, 2, 3, that's this 4th page. And what I'm doing now is I have close-ups of this entire page, but in 2 parts so that it's easier to read. Questions and answers on the land use provisions of RLUPA. Who is protected and what type of activities are covered? Let me just tell you right now, okay? So that you can understand it when we come to it. The whole idea of this act is to say that if you have a religious or educational, but we're focusing on the religious part, a religious building that serves some kind of religious purpose, then that trumps any zoning ordinances that may exist in the municipality or government district in which this religious building is being reared. It is given, religious buildings are now given protected status under this federal law, Arupa, which means that if you're going to, as a city, not allow a religious building to be constructed, even though it violates your local zoning ordinances, then you have to come up with an overwhelmingly good reason as to why it is that you're targeting these poor religious people and discriminating against them and not allowing them to build their building the way they want to build it, as long as it's for a religious observance or a religious exercise, right? And it is the church who's building this religious structure that gets to determine whether it is part of their religious exercise. Judges don't get into that. They basically, if the religion says this is part of our religious exercise or observant, then that's good enough for us, and then we're going to allow it to happen. Now, having said that, now let's go ahead and read this, and hopefully it'll make more sense with that little preface. Who is protected and what types of activities are covered? Arupa protects the religious exercise of persons defined to include religious assemblies and institutions in addition to individuals. So churches, LDS Church covered, check. Courts have applied Arupa, for example, in cases involving houses of worship. Hello, ding, 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 ding. Houses of worship. Individuals holding prayer meetings in their homes, religious schools, religious retreat centers, cemeteries, and faith-based social services provided by religious entities. Houses of worship, i.e., temples. Oh, yeah, this covers temples. What does religious exercise include? Arupa provides that religious exercise includes any exercise of religion, whether or not compelled by or central to a system of religious belief. It doesn't have to be central to it. It doesn't have to be compelled by it. It's just something that you do as part of your religion. Thus, a county or municipality cannot avoid the force of Arupa by asserting that a particular religious activity is something that a religious group merely wants to do rather than something that it must do. For example, a town could not claim that Sunday school classes are not religious exercise because they are not religious exercises, whatever, because they are less central to a church's beliefs or less compulsory than worship services. So you can see how this act gives broad authority to churches in designating what it is that they're building as having something to do with their religious exercise. Arupa also specifies that the use, building, or conversion of real property, the use, building, or conversion of real property for the purpose of religious exercise shall be considered to be religious exercise. So building on real estate, yeah, religious exercise. This provision makes clear that religious exercise under Arupa includes construction or expansion of places of worship, like temples, and other properties used for religious exercise. So obviously this applies to a lot of different things, but temples is squarely under what it addresses and protects. Courts have held that religious exercise covers a wide range of activities, including operation of various faith-based social services, facilities, accessories such as fellowship halls, parish halls, and similar buildings or rooms used for meetings, religious education, and similar functions. Operation of a religious retreat center in a house, religious gatherings at homes, and construction or expansion of religiously affiliated schools, even where the facilities would be used for both secular and religious educational activities. Who is bound by Arupa's requirements? In other words, who has to follow this federal law? Basically, everybody. Arupa applies to states, including state departments and agencies and their subdivisions, such as counties, municipalities, villages, towns, cities, city councils, planning boards, zoning boards, and zoning appeals boards. So who does it apply to? It applies to you. If you are any kind of government agency or subdivision in the United States, yeah, this applies to you, pal. So you better sit up and pay attention and allow these things to go forward, even if they violate your local zoning rules. All right. Now, I wanted to go back to that highlighted part from the email, that second email we read, the letter, right? Now, let's read it again and see if this makes more sense to you, why it is they're wanting all the members to include this in their letters to the city council and the planning commissions in McKinney, Texas. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance, capital R, capital O. They're forcing the language to fit within what is protected by the Arupa federal statute. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Can you see how they're crafting this language to fit what Arupa protects? Steeples point toward heaven and serve a purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. See how religiously observant the use of steeples in temples is? It's obviously protected by Arupa. All right, that's why that's there. Now, question. Why didn't the church lawyers in McKinney, Texas simply cite to the 2000 federal law and claim victory, or do so in the future, and come in and say, look, Arupa says that, and by the way, I want to say this. I don't know right now whether that very large 170 some odd foot steeple that's planned for the McKinney, Texas temple violates any zoning ordinances in the place where it has been selected and the property purchased for it to be built. Do you know the answer to that, Rebecca?
Oh, yes, it absolutely does violate. Yes, there's a lot of different pieces in there, and they're all. But yes, it's a 35-foot roof line, and then anything above that, there's going to have to be some kind of special condition, which is why we're talking about this. But yes, it does.
I figured there would be, because the churches having this habit, it seems, of selecting temple sites in residential neighborhoods instead of in places where they would fit into the zoning that already exists. They're trying to put it in places where zoning is for residential, and these steeples end up over and over again, we've seen this in other places, violating the zoning ordinances that are in effect for that zone where they're putting the temple. All right, thank you for answering that question, Rebecca. I figured that was the answer, but I also figured you would know. The answer is, so why don't the church lawyers in McKinney, Texas just go in, cite to Arupa in their briefing and say, we win, King's X. Hey, we can do this. And I think the answer is because there is nothing the lawyers can cite to in the records of the church that would support their claim, which they have to make as part of this motion, that temple steeple height is part of Mormon religious exercise, because there isn't anything there. If they could quote to it, so from an address by Gordon B. Hinckley back in the 1990s, where he talks about how important, the temple spire height is to our religious exercise, boom, they would have this, but they don't, because it's a fiction. All right. It is a fiction that they are now trying to put across to the city council members and the planning commission in McKinney, Texas, and they're trying to put it across through their members. Therefore, they are having the church and its lawyers, therefore they are having the members, because they can't do it themselves because there's no record, they are having the members mention it in letters to the McKinney Planning Commission and City Council as if temple steeple height is something that members of the church already understand as being part of their religious observance, capital R, capital O. Now, these are my thoughts, my conclusions right now based upon the research that I've done actually this morning. And so I will bracket them with the fact that, yeah, I can't say this is hard and fast, absolutely what happened, but it sure looks like it makes sense with the facts. Now, this is a story that has to do not with the McKinney, Texas temple, but with the Boston, Massachusetts temple. From many years ago, it was actually the 100th temple that was dedicated, number 100. And this says, not long after construction, this will tie in, believe me, big time. Just bear with me. Not long after construction of the Boston, Massachusetts temple began, a few neighbors became alarmed by its size and filed suit with the intention to have the temple torn down. The plaintiffs argued that the state's Dover Amendment, that'll be important. It's a law in the state of Massachusetts that has effect in the state of Massachusetts, which basically says something similar to what Arupa ends up saying, which is if you are building something as a religious organization and it's part of your religious observance, then you kind of get a King's X on this, and you're going to be able to build it regardless of whether it violates the local zoning, unless the government entity in which the temple is being built can show overwhelmingly that they need to violate or they need to not allow it, and that it serves this huge government purpose. It's really important, and this government purpose can be achieved in no other way than by infringing on the structure of this religious organization. So that's why it's so powerful. But this is the Dover Amendment. It is in Massachusetts. It is a Massachusetts state law and therefore applies only in Massachusetts. Okay. Arupa is a federal law which applies in all the states. All right. Going on with this article, the plaintiffs argued, these are the neighbors who don't want the temple there. The plaintiffs argued that the state's Dover Amendment, which exempts religious buildings from local zoning, violated the separation of church and state. So they're saying that the amendment itself is unconstitutional. The federal judge disagreed and ruled in favor of the church. Salt Lake Organizing Committee President Mitt Romney escorted U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy through the Boston, Massachusetts temple during the VIP open house. That's the one I wasn't invited to. Were you invited to that one, Bill? The VIP open house?
I was not
Rebecca?
allowed to go to that, no.
Oh, no, I'm banned from things. Remember, like Book of Mormon Central dinners? Yeah, I never get invited. I get banned.
Okay, well, then I don't feel so bad.
No.
But Mitt Romney was there to escort Ted Kennedy through the VIP open house to the Boston, Massachusetts temple. Just 6 years earlier, Romney had challenged Kennedy for his veteran seat in the Senate in a heated race many considered too close for comfort. The Boston, Massachusetts temple was dedicated without a steeple. The Boston, Massachusetts temple was dedicated without a steeple due to a lawsuit contesting the proposed height of the steeple. My, how history repeats itself. The church eventually won the case on appeal, and the 139-foot steeple was added about a year after the dedication. Elder Lawrence C. Dunn, the first president of the Boston, Massachusetts temple, passed away just hours after the court's ruling that the steeple could be added, so at least he died happy. All right. Now, that made me wonder, when the heck was the Boston, Massachusetts temple dedicated? Because I don't have all these facts just rolling around in my head, but fortunately, there's a thing called the internet. So I went on this website dealing with the Boston, Massachusetts temple, and here's what it says. The announcement was made 30 December 1995. The groundbreaking and site dedication was 1997, and the public open house was from 29 August to 23 September of 2000. So the construction went into 2000, and then it was dedicated without the steeple, which would be added a year later. So right now, just remember 2000. If you can remember September 2000, so much the better. That's when it was dedicated, the Boston, Massachusetts temple. If we go back to this Department of Justice synopsis of the Arupa Statute, I just want to point out a couple things here, okay? In the first paragraph, Congress passed Arupa unanimously in what year? 2000. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. President Clinton signed it into law on September 22nd, 2000, which ironically happened to be the next to last day of the open house for the Boston temple, because it went through September 23rd, 2000, remember? So right here, yeah, right there. 29 August to 23rd September 2000. These are happening at the same time. And who was it who sponsored this bill? Let's look at the third paragraph. As Arupa's Senate sponsors, Senator Hatch and the late Senator Kennedy said in their joint statement, I don't care what they say in their joint statement for purposes of this. What you need to know is that Senator Orin Hatch, along with his good buddy, Ted Kennedy, and I'm not saying that facetiously, they were famously like the odd couple, but very different viewpoints politically, but they seem to enjoy each other's company. So it's not surprising they did this together. But what we have to understand is that in the year 2000, Orin Hatch, along with Ted Kennedy, I'm suspecting this was led by Orin Hatch, and Ted Kennedy threw in for his friend to make it bipartisan. It passed unanimously because of that. Comes up with this Arupa statute, which they put through Congress, and it gets passed and made law in the year 2000. Okay, next part. Now, I'm still focusing on Orin Hatch. Orin Hatch is a senator from Utah, United States senator from Utah, who served for a long period of time, distinguished career. But there's another United States senator, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, Orin Hatch, yeah, he was a Mormon. Okay, famously, he was a Mormon, and he was a faithful, observant Mormon, unlike Harry Reid. Harry Reid was much more liberal, and Orin Hatch was much more conservative and much more likely to do what it was that the church wanted him to do. There's another senator, a United States senator who served also at this time. His name is Gordon Smith, and he was a United States senator from the state of Oregon. And sometime after he had stopped serving as a senator, and I'm not exactly sure when this happens. Okay, it's sometime after the Iraqi war started. But Senator, or former Senator, Gordon Smith, whose face is right up here, he presents to the Council of the 12 Apostles in Salt Lake City. And I have 3 clips from this. By the way, I have to give a shout out to Mormon Leaks, who obtained this in some way and then released it. It's available on YouTube because of their efforts. But this is remarkable because what we find out from this is that this U.S. Senator, Gordon Smith from Oregon, considers it his highest duty as a senator to promote the interests of the LDS Church. And the first clip is of somebody that we don't see a lot of in recent weeks, Elder Ballard, since he's passed away now. But Elder Ballard gets up and he introduces not Senator Gordon Smith, but another guy whose first name is Ralph. And Ralph has the position of being the liaison between Salt Lake City and the church leaders and Gordon Smith's office. He's the one who carries the messages back and forth. So here is in the first clip, Elder Ballard introducing Ralph the liaison. Then the second clip is Ralph the liaison talking about his experience with Gordon Smith and Gordon Smith's office. And the last clip, and these are all just a couple minutes long, if that much, is Gordon Smith himself talking about how it is his most important duty as a senator to promote the interests of the church. Do we have the first clip there, Bill?
Yep. So here we go.
Brethren, we're honored to have with us today Senator Gordon Smith and Ralph Harding. These two brethren have performed marvelous work for public affairs and for the church in general. And it's a privilege to have them here. And we've asked Ralph if he would introduce our wonderful senator. I'm so pleased to have you with us. And now I'll turn it over if you two brethren like to come up. Then Ralph, if you'd introduce the senator, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, so that's
Dear brethren, I have known.
Oh, so sorry. Sorry, Arfim. It said to go to timestamp 50 seconds.
Oh, well, go ahead. I'm so sorry. Go ahead. I interrupted my own timestamp.
That's okay.
Senator Gordon Harold Smith, now a youthful 56 years of age, since he was a boy of 2, when his parents, Mylan, Dee, and Jeff.
So that was it.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. By the way, it did have a card on the front. This is alleged to have happened on February 18th, 2009 is when this took place. Okay. So that's the date on this. So we've got Elder Ballard introducing Ralph, who's the liaison. The second clip is now Ralph, the liaison, going to be talking about his experience dealing with Gordon Smith's office. And the word and expression church broke enters the lexicon.
In the Senate. Gordon became a skilled legislator and of greatest importance to this council today and in this sanctuary. I stand as a witness of his tireless advocacy for the vital interest of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For in my experience, he always stood ready first and foremost as a high priest and as a covenant member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint, and receptive and able and willing to serve its most vital interest in Washington and, in fact, internationally. Though I can't remember any Latter-day Saints that were permanent members of his staff, it was fair to say that his staff in the Senate was church broke. In fact, not many months ago, his legislative director called me on the phone and he said, "Ralph, you haven't called us for 6 weeks. What are we supposed to be doing?"
Okay, so the next clip, by the way, for any of you who are not familiar with the United States system of government, a senator is a representative from the state that they are elected in. And they're supposed to represent the interests of the citizens of the state that they're elected in, which in his case is Oregon. His job is not, repeat, not to represent the interests of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any other church as far as that goes. His job is just to represent the interests of the people who elected this guy. But he gets elected. He's a faithful Mormon. And of course, as faithful Mormons will do, especially if they're church broke, really the representation of the people who elected him is secondary. And it's the church, the church, the church. That's who he's going to put on the front burner. That's the top shelf. That's who he's going to make a priority of representing their interests. And the liaison said that as well, incredibly saying that sometimes he would get calls from people in his staff saying, we haven't heard from you, i.e. we haven't heard from the liaison with the church in Salt Lake. We haven't heard from the church in Salt Lake in 6 weeks. What are we supposed to do? You got to tell us, man. We're here for you. Just give us the marching orders and we'll take care of business here in Washington, D.C. Now there's a brief clip here of a rather long address by Gordon Smith himself, in which he expresses the same kind of sentiments. This is just a minute or two at the most.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for your way too generous introduction. Brethren, I'm honored to be in your presence. My parents, Mylon Smith and Jessica Udall, raised me with a fundamental principle, and that is to follow the brethren. And so while I'm somewhat accustomed to speaking with United States senators and even presidents of the United States, I stand humbly before you because I know who you are, and I know my covenants, and I know the role that you play in this world in building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world. That's the title that I used as an address to your Public Affairs Committee the other day.
Yes, building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world. That's his catchphrase and the title of an address he gave just the other day. And he's going to quote a little bit of it. And he goes on and on for quite a bit and then answers some questions from the apostles. Okay, he's totally on board. This is Senator Gordon Smith from Oregon, who is church broke and will do whatever it is that the church tells him to do. So now we go to the next slide, Mr. Reel, and we ask the question, are we to believe that Senator Orin Hatch was any less church broke and any less willing to do the bidding of church leaders than Senator Gordon Smith? That's my question. If that were Harry Reid up there, the answer might be different, but I think it's pretty clear what the answer is when you put in Senator Orin Hatch. Of course, he is just as church broke and is willing to do whatever the church tells him to do, which may indeed lead into why it was that he was a sponsor of this Arupa Federal Act in the year 2000. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I asked the question, is it possible that the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, Arupa, of 2000 might just as well have been called the LDS Boston Temple Steeple Waiver Act? Because I've got a feeling that it just may be that in spite of the language of the act and how it applies to all sorts of different religions, which it must in order to pass constitutional muster itself, that the specific reason that this was sponsored by Senator Orin Hatch was in response to a direction that he got from Salt Lake City that had to do with paving the way for the Boston Temple against public discontent and public action against it, and also its steeple. So let me flesh that out just a little bit. This is the heading of the case that went up to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court. I make that distinction because something will go up to the U.S. Supreme Court here in a little bit. Not this case, but it's Arlene Martin and others versus the corporation of the presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is 434 Mass 141. That's the title. You can find it in the volume and page. And it was, I think, argued January 12, 2001, but the ruling was issued May 16th, 2001 in Middlesex County, and it talks about those who were present. Those are the justices. I read the article. I read this opinion. Critically, this opinion does not mention Arupa. Now, it doesn't mention Arupa because what it bases its decision on, which is in favor of the church. And that's why the church gets to build its steeple, though it's a year after the building itself was finished and dedicated without the steeple. This is why they get to build the steeple, is because of this opinion. What they ended up doing, let me go ahead and read this. The ruling granted the church's claim to have a temple that violated the zoning ordinances under the Dover Amendment. Once again, that's the Massachusetts law. In Massachusetts, which, similar to the federal law passed in the year 2000, made a religious building essentially exempt from zoning laws if the structure involved a religious purpose. Hence, the 2000 Arupa, the federal law, essentially made the Massachusetts Dover Amendment into federal law applicable to all states, including Massachusetts, but not just Massachusetts. And I hope that this is clear enough, because what follows, I think, is very interesting. This is the Dover Amendment, which I obtained from Wikipedia. The Dover Amendment is the common name for Massachusetts general law, and I put in there passed in 1950 because I saw somewhere else when I was doing my research, and I believe it's correct that the Dover Amendment itself is as old as 1950. This law exempts agricultural, religious, and educational uses from certain zoning restrictions by limiting what zoning requirements apply to land and structures that hold these uses. The Dover Amendment makes it easier for these uses to build structures to serve their needs. The Dover Amendment allows many developers to build facilities that are substantially larger than zoning laws would ordinarily allow, or which would be considered inappropriate by some for the neighborhood. In other words, the non-Mormon neighbors who don't want this temple going up in their neighborhood with a spire that goes halfway to the sky and shines all night long. Okay, that's the Dover Amendment in a nutshell. And you can see how similar it is to those provisions of the Arupa Statute that we went over earlier. Question I ask, why pass then? Why pass a federal law in the year 2000, the Arupa Statute, when the Dover Amendment would ultimately prevail in the Boston Temple Steeple case? You don't need this federal law when you've got a law in Massachusetts that does the same thing, and which indeed ends up being the law that the Massachusetts Supreme Court uses in order to uphold the violation of the zoning by the church in its steeple. The answer, which came to me this afternoon, is because the Dover Amendment itself was at the same time being challenged as to its constitutionality, which the U.S. Supreme Court would not rule on until January of 2001, when the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Dover Amendment in a completely separate case. So here's the issue. If the church goes forward based upon the Dover Amendment exclusively, which does apply in Boston because it's a Massachusetts statute, and if they put all their eggs in that basket, and then in the separate case, which is challenging the constitutionality of the Dover Amendment, if the U.S. Supreme Court says, sorry, the Dover Amendment is unconstitutional, we're striking it down, now the church is screwed in Massachusetts because it doesn't have any law to rely on in order to have its temple built in violation of the local zoning ordinances. Note, if the Massachusetts Supreme Court had not ruled for the church and its Temple Steeple based on the state's Dover Amendment, it would have been compelled to reach the same conclusion based on the 2000 federal law sponsored by Senators Orin Hatch and Teddy Kennedy. So this is a plan B. If indeed the Dover Amendment, and everybody knew it was being challenged because, you know, it takes years for a challenge to a statute to win its way up to the United States Supreme Court. So they know it's being challenged and it's on its way to the Supreme Court. If it had been struck down, then the backup plan is to have Orin Hatch and Teddy Kennedy propose and sponsor federal legislation, which would do the same thing in Massachusetts as well as in all the other states of the Union. It would give that same kind of protection to any kind of religious building, as long as it is being used for something that has to do with religious observance or religious exercise. As it turned out, they didn't need to have that because the Dover Amendment was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, and therefore this Arupa Statute doesn't appear in the Massachusetts Supreme Court opinion ruling in favor of the church and the church Temple Steeple. All right, now all of this gets summarized here in an article which is in the archives of the Church News from May 19th, 2001. This is right after the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled in favor of the church. And if you look in the background there, they have a picture of the Boston Temple without the steeple. That's what it looked like. It was completely done except for the steeple, which had to wait for a year in order for it to be permitted to be added on because of this case in Massachusetts. So Church News Archives, 19 May 2001, Boston, Mass. A unanimous ruling by the Massachusetts Supreme Court May 16th ended a lengthy debate about the height of the Boston Temple and paves the way for the church to complete construction of a steeple. Quote, the church applauds the decision of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, said Dale Bills, church spokesman. The court's decision truly reflects the religious freedom that has been long cherished in New England in clearing the way for the church to mount a single spire on the building. The court has ratified and affirmed the earlier judgments of those who are best able to make such decisions on behalf of the community. Yeah, you always say nice things about the courts when they rule in your favor. They're really smart when they rule for you. When they rule against you, they're dumb as bricks. The article goes on. The dispute hinged on whether the steeple was critical to the religious purposes of the temple. Remember those emails that are going out now, even as we speak? The religious purposes, the steeple. This is 2001, mind you. A local governing board in Belmont, Mass., where the temple is located, originally approved the steeple, stating that the state's Dover Amendment granted religious edifices exemption from local zoning restrictions. And I highlighted this one in red because this is where I found out about it. The U.S. Supreme Court also upheld the Dover Amendment in January of 2001 by saying that it did not grant unconstitutional advantages to religious groups. But several vocal opponents of the temple who live nearby in an upscale neighborhood, which I guess is where they decided to plant the temple, contended that the steeple was not necessary for worship and that it should not be allowed to exceed zoning laws. Their argument prevailed with a trial court judge last year who said the steeple was not a necessary element of the Mormon religion. But in its May 16th ruling, the state's highest court unanimously disagreed. Writing for the court, Chief Justice Margaret Marshall rejected the decision of the trial court in a 17-page opinion, saying that, quote, it is not for judges to determine whether the inclusion of a particular architectural feature is necessary for a particular religion. See, they get to kind of decide that themselves. And the final page, the steeple we really believe, oh, that's a giveaway. See the really part? This is from the a member of the stake presidency in Boston. Notice what he's saying. Remember this, 2001. The steeple, we really believe, is an integral part of the symbolism of the building. This has been going on a while, hasn't it? Said Grant Bennett, a member of a stake presidency in Boston. By the way, anytime somebody puts really in front of believe, it's usually an indication that they're lying. I'm just saying. The steeple, we really believe. If they really believed it, you'd have to put really in front of it. And that's the quote from Grant Bennett, a member of stake presidency in Boston, quoted by Associated Press as he responded to inquiries from the local media. The ruling effectively ends the case. Brother Bennett said, construction of the steeple will begin soon and should be completed this summer. The church plans to construct the steeple with minimal impact on the neighborhood. The stately 70,000 square foot Boston Temple was dedicated without a steeple on October 1, 2000 by President Gordon B. Hinckley. And that steeple was built after this decision and put back on top there the following year so that it could look, instead of like this. And isn't that much more satisfying if you're a neighbor in this upscale community who is fighting against this temple and its steeple every step of the way.
Hmm.
Rebecca, what do you think? I know you've been following this a long time, and I know we had a discussion this morning after I wanted to share with you what I was finding out, and I was really excited about it.
That's true. RFM and I and my co-host Landon kind of arrived at the same conclusion almost at the same time. So he was excited to tell me. I was yelling, "Don't scoop me." That's what happens behind the scenes. But I have to say, I have not seen that Smith video for a while. And I just, oh my goodness, I forgot how upsetting that is. And I just want to mention before I make some comments about Ralupa is that some of the clips that you didn't see is, when he was here, I'll even read this. I found a quote. While Smith eventually became an opponent of the war in Iraq, because remember, this is back in the early 2000s, Smith said that he initially voted for it because I felt the Lord's hand and I did not think LDS missionaries would ever be allowed in the Arab states unless the rule of law took hold there. So if you ever question that there is influence from the LDS church in the federal government, do not question this. You can watch videos like this. He also said that his temple recommend was more important to him than his election certificate. So just a little side note, but if you ever question the influence, which speaks exactly to Ralupa, what we're talking about. And I will say the first time that I ever sort of became aware of this, so my co-host Landon and I on Mormonish have been sort of temple watchers for over a year now. One of our viewers about a year ago, maybe even a year and a half, it's been a long time, reached out to us from Cody, Wyoming, and said, there's something going on here with the LDS church and some residents in a temple. And we thought, what's this? Let's find out more. So we started working with the residents in Cody. And maybe some of you have seen our different podcasts that we've done over the last while about this. But the first inkling that I had of this Ralupa is one of these residents who was fighting to have the temple relocated. Again, we need to say it's not, don't build a temple at all. It's just follow the laws of the land. One of the women asked me, are there any temples with domes? And I thought that's a very interesting question. Why would you want to know if there were any temples with domes? And then she explained to me that they were, threatening the city council and the town to sue using this Ralupa, saying that the steeple that they wanted to put on the building there in Cody was exactly what they're saying here, an integral part of their religious worship. So of course, my co-host Landon and I, we gave them a whole list of temples that have domes, and they were able to kind of do a little workaround with that. And their attorney was very smart and was able to do some things to maneuver there. But I feel now, interestingly, flash forward, we started working with Heber, sort of the same kind of thing. Now here we're working with the residents in McKinney and also Lone Mountain. And here in McKinney, to see those letters and to see them try to backdate this idea that the height of the temple has always been part of our religion, we know exactly what they're trying to do. I think they were tipped off in Cody, and now they're like, that's not going to happen to us again. We're going to have something to point to show, just like RFM said, that it is indeed a central tenet of our religion. So it's just been fascinating to me to see it play out in real time. And I'm very glad that people like RFM, people like it was very funny when my co-host Landon realized it was Orin Hatch. She was like yelling, "You'll never believe who it is." And I think that's how you felt today too, that there were three senators that were Mormons that had sponsored this. So again, the message is, if you don't believe there's influence in the federal government from the very powerful Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, these are perfect examples of it. And thank you for all that explanation and due diligence, RFM, because it's very complex, but it's important to understand, especially for those residents in Lone Mountain and Heber and Cody and McKinney, who we salute you and what you're doing. I have to say, I know a lot of you are watching tonight, and we absolutely admire you. You are amazing people.
Yes, and hopefully some of this research may be of some benefit in your efforts to have the LDS Church follow the law and abide by the zoning ordinances in your community, and not use a fictionalized defense in order to subvert those zoning requirements and build the temple anyway.
Yeah. A couple thoughts. So one, as you pointed it out, it's a strange coincidence that at the exact same time they're doing the temple open house of a temple that they're not allowed to put the steeple on, there are laws being passed at the federal level by Orin Hatch, a faithful Latter-day Saint who's always indicated by his outward behavior that he is loyal to the church and to the brethren. That's just, it seems like almost too strange of a coincidence to be a coincidence. Number two, folks in the chat, because we have folks watching who are not members of the church but are following this story closely, there were 3 or 4 people who asked what church broke means. The easiest way for me to relate it would be if you were to capture a wild stallion horse, who that horse wants to do whatever the hell it wants to do because it isn't broken. When you break a horse, you essentially break its will so that it does what you want it to do. And when people in the church refer to being church broke, specifically politicians, what they are doing is showing their hand and letting the church know, I will do what you tell me to do. I'm church broke. So there's that. Next, in the original letter, they said to talk about the temple and how important it is, and that some of you should mention the steeple. It would have seemed too orchestrated to have everybody mention the steeple, and they know that. So they just wanted a certain percentage of people to mention the steeple. And when leaders tell Mormons to do something, good Mormons will do it. And so they knew that a certain number of those letters would come in mentioning the steeple. And then the last thing I will say, as a member, I'm not anymore, but as at one time a member of the church, all in, temple recommend holding, faithful, all believing Latter-day Saint, if the church had not told me to mention the steeple and had given me the meaning, I would have never, ever, ever, and nor would anyone else. You could have surveyed 1,000 Mormons, and if none of them were told to mention the steeple, none of them would have, because the steeple is simply not part of any piece of Mormon theology in my entire time in the church. And I've read practically every book on Mormon theology coming out from the church. It doesn't exist as far as I know.
Great comments. Thank you so much for those, Rebecca and Bill. So that completes this story. What's next up on the block, Bill?
Yeah, let's turn the time over to Rebecca, and she's got a story on garments, but a little twist on what we've covered in the past few weeks. Things may not be as you think they are on the Wasatch Front.
Garments in a twist. Let's hear about it.
Garments in a twist. Why didn't I think of that title? And I know we said week after week, okay, that's enough garment coverage. We will not, how ironic, garment coverage. Yeah, sorry. That's enough garment coverage. We're not going to talk about them again. For heaven's sakes, we're not going to make another thumbnail with garments on it. Right, Bill? But again, this data and this story came out, and I felt I really could not let this go by without mentioning it. And you'll see why. So this was an article in the Religion News Service, also picked up by the Salt Lake Tribune by the wonderful Jana Reese. And the title of the article is, it's not just young women who have a problem with Mormon temple garments, it's young adults, period. And the subtitle is, an LDS church leader recently said that garment rules were getting stricter because of the laxity of young women. If we remember that, we reported on this a couple of weeks in a row. It was the young women and their yoga pants, maybe some old women like me who wear yoga pants, that were causing the problems and not wearing our garments. Well, this is not exactly the case, as we're about to find out. So Jana Reese, who wrote the wonderful book, The Next Mormons, takes a lot of surveys of active LDS members and puts out a lot of data, crunches a lot of data, makes a lot of graphs, which really gives us a little bit of a snapshot of how things really are. So the article talks about this change in the Temple Recommend interview questions, which we have covered here on the newscast. So from about 1976 to 2019, the instruction in the Temple Recommend interview was, are you wearing the garment day and night? And again, for those that are watching that aren't LDS, a Temple Recommend interview is when you go in and talk to a leader and they ask you questions about your faith and make sure that you're following the tenets of your faith, what you're supposed to be doing. If you do, you're allowed into the temple. So the rule was night and day. In 2019, something amazing happened. They took that language out of the Temple Recommend question, and instead it said, do you keep the covenants that you made in the temple, including wearing the temple garment as instructed in the endowment? Well, the instruction was kind of vague. And so a lot of people took that to mean, oh, it's a don't ask, don't tell. They're going to leave it up to personal interpretation, personal revelation, your relationship with Christ and wearing the garment. And a lot of people started to, because for some people, it's very uncomfortable to wear garments, especially women. A lot of people started saying, you know what, I'm going to wear it on Sunday only, or maybe I'll wear it when I go to the temple, but not every day. So that went on for a couple years. And I believe some leaders took notice, especially notice of yoga pants, right? And so all of a sudden, last week, we got the word that the language was going to change. We got the word a little earlier, but it officially changed on Wednesday, April 17th. So now the language, when an LDS member goes in and sits with the bishop and they check to see if you're keeping all the rules, this would include paying tithing. It would also include drinking coffee, some of those kinds of questions. Now the language is, do you honor your sacred privilege to wear the garment as instructed in the initiatory ordinance? That will be followed then by an explanation, and it's a paragraph that I think we've covered here before a couple of weeks ago, that the garment should be worn day and night throughout your life. And if you are engaging in an activity where it has to be taken off, and I'll leave that to your imagination, you must restore it as soon as possible, meaning put it right back on. So that was interesting. They definitely called out women and they definitely changed the rule. So we learned about this because a general authority gave a fireside where he said, this is all about women and their yoga pants, and they're not wearing the garment, and instead they're wearing these horrible yoga pants. And I put this picture up here because I thought only RFM would recognize it. This is Professor Harold Hill from the Music Man. And I thought, it's just like this. We've got trouble in Salt Lake City. That starts with T, which rhymes with G, which stands for garments, right? We have it. Go ahead, finish the next line, RFM.
That was great. Remember, my friends, listen to me because I passed this way but once.
Uh-oh. Now we're just going to go the rest. No one else knows what the hell we're talking about. You and I will talk later. So, but anyway, it's a big problem. He definitely raised the alarm about this garment problem, and he specifically called out young women. And we're going to find out this is not the case. This is targeting, I believe, which is why I really needed to cover this article today. So we'll go on to Jana's the survey. They asked some general questions. And again, they're interviewing people who should be wearing garments. These are endowed members who are active and they should be wearing their garments. So the questions were like, I'm wearing them today. I wore them yesterday, but not today. I wore them more than 5 years ago. I mean, it really runs the gamut if you run through this, but they're trying to get a sample of how often people are wearing garments within the last week, within the last month. So this graph is really interesting. So there's a couple different takeaway points from this. The first was that the majority of people that are supposed to be wearing their garments, and those are the people in this survey, 54% of them said, yes, today when I'm sitting down to take this survey, I am wearing this garment. So the article makes that sound positive, but I'm like, only 54%? Of people that are supposed to be wearing their garments every day said they were. And you can look at this graph and you can see after that percentage every day, then it kind of, never, once a month, it's all over the gamut. But I guess you can say a very small majority of people do agree they're wearing their garments that day. They do wear them every day. So a second graph, a second point is that women, and this is where it flies in the face of everything that they reported in the last couple of weeks, women are actually slightly more compliant in wearing their garments than men, which I thought was really interesting. The difference is 56% of women and 53% of men. But even so, to make that judgment that just because perhaps it's more obvious if a woman isn't wearing her garments, and why are you looking at the yoga pants anyway? I don't know. But they made that generalization that it was women. And in reality, it's men who are less frequently wearing their garments. So that was something really interesting that Jana Reese was able to pull out. So she says in here, I thought was cute, that gendered yoga pants theory does not hold up under scrutiny. So if you take anything away today from this article, that's what you need to remember. The yoga pants theory, nope, it's not valid, not at all. So the third takeaway from the data that she crunched is that it really is more generational than it is gendered as far as who is wearing garments. So it says that 8 in 10 baby boomers, and that's anybody that was born before 1965, I missed it by that much. Although my kids still refer to me as a boomer. Thank you. They are predominantly wearing their garments. 84% are wearing the garment day and night. And then it just goes down from there. You've got Generation X, which is 42%. You've got millennials, 36%. And interestingly, Generation Z, younger than millennials, 41%. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm not sure if that has to do with more missionaries or men and women going, but still not at all those numbers that you see in the baby boomers that are a little bit older. Let's see. And again, she wanted to make sure that we recognized in this article that these are people that should be wearing these garments. These are not post-Mormons or people that don't identify as Mormons. These are the people that are in the pews every Sunday, that are endowed, that are attending the temple, and they should be wearing the garments. So honestly, it should be 100%, but it's not. The numbers are going down and down based on age, based on generation, not gendered, which I thought was really interesting. So, one of her takeaways here is that garment compliance among the younger members appears to be very low, especially for the millennials, as we saw from that last graph. She says it's likely understandable if the church's own research is producing these figures that it wants these members to fall in line, and it uses the Temple Recommend interview as a vehicle to encourage that. And that means checking, shaming, withholding to make sure that people are wearing garments. And I love this AI because all I typed in was young woman in bishop's interview. And I think it kind of got the Mormon look right here, almost exactly right, which I know Bill's going to talk about later.
I was going to say, based on the next story, that's exactly what we're looking at.
That's what I'm saying. AI went out and found that. So I was pretty impressed. It's pretty dang accurate. If you've ever sat in the very back of an LDS chapel during sacrament meeting, which I always did all my years, that is what you see. So anyway, so the point of this is just that wearing garments is a way to keep people back in line, keep them in the system, keep them on the covenant path, keep them talking to their leaders and making sure that they're doing everything they need to do. Let's see. So she says, kind of in closing, but in the next Mormon data, at least, there is no reason to single out women as instigators. And then she says, I know we have, as Latter-day Saints, have a long history of projecting our cultural anxieties onto women's bodies. Hence somebody just saying, it's you women in yoga pants that are doing this. It's not. It isn't at all. It's a choice. It's not a gendered choice. It's actually a generational choice. And then she says, no amount of yoga pants shaming will change the fact that a majority of middle-aged and young adult members seem unenthusiastic about garments, men as well as women. So that's what the data shows, which I thought was, extremely interesting and pretty much the opposite of what we've been reporting on and just kind of took at face value for the last couple of weeks. So then I thought I would kind of reach out on social media and see what some people were saying. So I made some posts and got some information back, and I'll have to paraphrase at the end because this little thing covers it. But one person said, it makes you wonder if the revised policy is based on empirical data or an anecdotal data of some church leaders hanging out at Starbucks in Draper. I'm not going to argue with that. If it were empirical, I can just see the data analysts sweating. In addition to checking for garments, we collected data on other variables. Those include breast augmentation, Botox, hair highlights, eyelashes, extensions, and Lululemon clothing. We observed that all these factors were highly correlated with not wearing garments. And then the supervisor says, let's just jump into all these variables and roll it all into one, yoga pants. So that might have been the workaround that they did. But they're watching and trying to figure out, why aren't the younger generations wearing garments? I think it seems pretty self-explanatory. I thought this one was great too. It seems like priesthood leaders blaming women wearing yoga pants was just typical Mormon sexism raising its head again. And then another comment, why am I not surprised about this? And they say they've been shaming women since 1820. So I thought, here's a woman in 1820 in her yoga pants. Yes, it's been going on for centuries. So I was surprised that I could create and generate AI when I said women in 1820 wearing yoga pants. It actually did it. So I thought that was great. Here's another comment that said 100% of the people making the rules are old men who spend all day in tip-top air-conditioned offices. I guarantee if they were anything but businessmen, lawyers, and doctors, the rules might be different. I bet if there was an asphalt worker in the Q15, the rules might be more lax. And that could be true. Maybe not quite in touch with the reality of the common person and the problems that wearing garments pose day to day. So this was a great comment, I thought. I think I just have one or two left. They don't have to wear garments, but for some reason they choose to. They truly religiously love to suffer for their faith. This is the main reason we are unlikely to see major changes to garment policies. It is intended to be unpleasant and a means of binding people to the church through shared suffering and socially odd practices. The true believers are not blindly obedient. Rather, they revel in their own discomfort and sacrifice in this crazy way. So I thought that was a really good observation. The one I thought was probably really, really true. I thought this was great. Mormons will never be considered mainline Christians with this fascination over garment wearing them, not wearing them. They are creepy. And I've had that thought before too. And this is an interesting collection that I kind of put together. A Mormonish Podcast is going to do an episode on the history of garments. I know that either RFM or Mormonism Live did one a couple years ago that was really good, but it used to be that you would order your own garments. You could call the Salt Lake Knitting Store and they would design garments, that fit you perfectly, tailor-made, LDS garments. And they have some pictures here. I'm not sure why this child is wearing garments. I guess it's a mommy me kind of a thing, but that's kind of interesting. And these are some pictures of the history of garments. You have some of the early ones. They had a collar because when Emma and Eliza and some of the other women were designing it, they didn't have any buttons and no way to fasten it. So it has a collar and it has string. No symbolism, just simply didn't have buttons. So take that. You can see kind of the generation, the one piece, the two piece, the union suit, and then the kind of the two piece that we have today. Here's an earlier picture. But the history of garments is really, really interesting. I came across something I thought extremely unusual that I'm going to show you as I go to our next slide. This is a magazine article in the Observer, right? This is 1978. A reporter came to Salt Lake City to learn about Mormons and learn about garments. And you can't read it too well, but the headline in red says, "Revealed, the Mormon chastity garment for a full frontal, see page 30. So, I used to be a librarian. I've spent like the last week trying to find a copy of this archived magazine because dang it, I want to see that full frontal. But obviously there's a curiosity.
We all.
Don't we all?
Well, yeah. The thing I didn't know was that Scott Baio was a Mormon.
Exactly. I thought it looked like Scott Baio too. I feel like that hairstyle doesn't match exactly what he's wearing, but apparently somewhere in these pages of this magazine from 1978, there is a full frontal view of what the Mormon garment looks like. So people were curious, to go back to that last Reddit post. People are curious about what it was, and it definitely sets you apart. And I think I'll leave you with this last slide. You might want to cover your eyes. You might remember this guy. For every person who won't wear their garments when they should, there is another person who's wearing their garments when they shouldn't. This is bow and arrow guy, and he appeared on the news. He had been arrested, and they wanted to interview him a couple years ago about what happened. And he was wearing, you can't see it. I think it might be blocked off by the slide, or maybe you guys can, but he was full on wearing his garments. And this was just on a news program here in Salt Lake. And again, I question why the people filming this would not have, they know what that means to have someone sitting there in their garments, why they wouldn't have maybe encouraged him to put something else on. But anyway, garments will always be a hot topic, to wear them, to not wear them, what's happening. But I'm hoping maybe this is the last coverage of garments that we'll have for a while. What do you guys think?
I don't know. It's open. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
This is what church broke looks like right here.
Yes, absolutely.
That's
this is the Mormon version of Hawkeye.
I don't know. Any thoughts, Bill? What do you think? It's not women, it's men that actually are wearing their garments less. We should be offended over the last coverage of the last couple weeks.
Yeah, three things. First thought is that I think one of the factors, and I'll say why I think so, but one of the factors I think is that garment sales are down. When the church went lenient on the temple question, less people were going to wear their garment all the time, which meant less garments were needed, which meant less people were buying them. And you say, that's a silly thing, Bill. That's never come up. Why would you think that? Well, it's because in 1981, the church revised its Book of Mormon. And by 1987, it had a huge surplus of them that it couldn't get rid of. So what did the church do? It invented the family to family Book of Mormon program, which was put out to the members as a way to increase member testimony, to bring converts into the church. But what it really was a way for the church to get rid of old inventory and to not have it any longer sitting in boxes taped up in a warehouse. So the church was able to get rid of all of its old inventory of Book of Mormons. It often says something on the surface when underneath it has a different motivation for doing so. And I'm not convinced that garment sales aren't down for that reason. Number two, you mentioned the wearing of the garment is a sacrifice. It is. One of the things that high demand fundamentalist religions do is a mechanism called costly signaling. You put a burden on members so that when they are living the faith, they are able, because it costs something, to signal to members around them that they are willing to make that sacrifice and to signal this thing that is costly. So it might be the time and resources. It might be tithing. It could be going every Wednesday night and Sunday to the church to carry out a calling. But garments are one of those things that you are signaling that you are willing to be weird and odd to the non-members. That when you go to the doctor's visit, when you're in the locker room at the YMCA, you signal to everyone that I'm willing to take some embarrassment or discomfort because that's what it means to me to be a good Mormon. And that also plays into the idea of being church broke. You have been convinced that you will show in a multitude of ways that you will make your will susceptible to theirs. Like you will cave in to what they want you to do. Number 3, and my last thought was, you showed the picture of the kid. That might have been a baptismal outfit, but I will say, living here in Southern Utah, of the fundamentalist groups, the kids wear garments too. So the kids in Colorado City and in, I believe, Centennial Park, their clothes are from their wrist all summer long. In Southern Utah, where it's 110 degrees, 113 degrees out, they wear long button-down plaid shirts from their wrist, and they wear jeans down to their ankles. And it's been confirmed to me that not only do the adults in these systems wear garments, the children do too. And so there may be something to early church history where the kids also wore them. I don't know that. But anyway, those are my 3 thoughts.
RFM, what do you think?
Well, one of those thoughts was mine, which had to do with that picture in that church-sanctioned newspaper and ad with the little kid wearing the garments. And I was wondering if the question you asked about that little kid might bear fruit being pursued, because I am thinking the same thing that Bill was thinking, that perhaps at that time in church history, they did have little kids who were not, well, to my knowledge, were not eligible to go to the temple to get their endowment, but they're still wearing their garments. And I think that would be an interesting line of research. Second thing had to do with the yoga pants theory. I do not know how much research went into this conclusion by church leaders that women were more breaching the garment wearing mandate than men were. Okay. I don't know how much research went into that, but I can tell you that by simple observation, it is easier to tell when a woman is not wearing her garments than when a man is not wearing her garments. For instance, right now, you could not tell by observation whether I am wearing my garments or not. You could not tell by observation whether Bill Reel is wearing his garments or not. But you could tell by observation whether Rebecca Biblioteca is wearing her garments or not. And I expect the people who are doing the observing are predominantly, if not exclusively, male. And therefore, they're simply going off what they're observing. And yoga pants may indeed be a part of that observation. So that was just a thought there. And the third thing also kind of went along with what Bill said about this idea of you do something as part of your religious observance that is sort of a sacrifice. It's not easy. It's not necessarily comfortable. Obviously, garments that you wear today are much more comfortable than right when I joined the church, when they were just segueing out of the one pieces into the two pieces, thank goodness. And I wore one pieces for a lot of my mission. And let me tell you, one pieces and riding bicycles in hot Japanese weather, especially if it's nylon, not a pleasant experience. So I'm just thankful for the two pieces. But even so, not necessarily the most comfortable thing, sort of like John the Baptist in the New Testament, who wore his garments, which were made of camel's hair. So, yeah. And there's a long tradition in the Middle Ages of religious individuals wearing garments of sackcloth that are specifically designed to be very uncomfortable, and that they wore those as part of their religious sacrifice and observance. Garments are not as bad as sackcloth. At least they're not made out of burlap, as far as I know. But I think it falls under the same kind of line of reasoning. I'm sorry, Bill, what?
Weren't the original garments unbleached wool?
I think
if I'm not mistaken. So I can't imagine how scratchy, how hot, and again, a major area that Mormonism thrived in the 1800s was St. George, Utah. And again, it's super hot down here.
I will tell you, just having anything that's made out of wool next to my skin, I don't like it. I don't do it. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like a scarf, something like that.
Yeah.
Won't do it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from you, Rebecca?
No, I just thought that was really interesting. And like I said, perhaps an end to garment reporting and garment watching for a while. We'll see what happens.
There we go. And we'll finish off, folks. Thank you to both of you for your stories. We'll finish off tonight with a story from social media where a video was released by a content creator where she suggested that Mormons tend to look alike. And so we'll play that one now. Whoop, let me do that. Former LDS member Alyssa Grenfell shared her belief that Mormons resemble each other due to the limited gene pool and shared cultural traits. Her video went out on February 15th of 2024 and went viral and has garnered upwards of 2.5 million plus views. And in recent weeks, major news agencies have picked up on the story. Grenfell suggests that the faith's placed importance on temple marriage limits most Mormons to marrying within the faith, and hence a limited gene pool, and has led to distinctive physical appearance among members. And such seems to be true, as research suggests Mormons and non-Mormons can point out Latter-day Saints when presented the faces of random people. And they do so at a statistically significant mark of 60% of the time, with a study indicating that both Mormons and non-Mormons are able to identify Latter-day Saints based on quote-unquote skin texture. The Deseret News, as well as the YouTube channel Ward Radio and others, got in on the action, defending the church, pointing out that such isn't a limited gene pool as much as it is the collective practice of the faith's members to not drink alcohol, use drugs, or get tattoos, and that such leads to an appearance that stands out as more likely to be Mormon. Various factions of Mormons do in fact look the same. One need only look to a few examples to see how various factions of Mormonism encourage or impose congruity, assimilation, and fitting in. But it should be noted that believing members have been taught to assign a specific reason to their ability to discern who is Mormon and who isn't. Numerous LDS leaders and the leaders of other Mormon factions, as well as the messages in LDS correlated curriculum and the LDS scriptures themselves, describe the countenance of one who is true to the faith and that it will be different than that of others. James E. Faust of the First Presidency even went so far as to say that it is the light in their eyes when he said, quote, "Those who truly repent receive the Spirit of Christ and are baptized into this church under the remission of their sins. Hands are laid upon their heads, and through the priesthood of God, they receive the Holy Ghost. It is the gift of God unto all those who diligently seek him, and as Parley P. Pratt characterized it, the gift of the Holy Ghost is, as it were, joy to the heart and light to the eyes," unquote. The church's website defining countenance as the general appearance of a person's face, which often reflects spiritual attitude and state of mind. And while Mormons may be discernible based on an outward countenance such as skin tone or the quote-unquote light in their eyes, it is worthy of note to acknowledge that so many LDS abusers, right up to their being caught and their crimes publicized, had the same righteous countenance. Bishops, mission presidents, stake presidents, Mormon therapists also were seen by their wards and stakes as being righteous and having the Holy Ghost and having the light in their eyes. LDS leaders such as Paul H. Dunn, Jeffrey R. Holland, and Russell M. Nelson all are credited with appearing to be righteous in spite of their propensities to embellish or fabricate stories over and over again. Maybe whatever the look is that Mormons have that is recognizable and sets them apart, that maybe the main takeaway is that even if being able to point out the Mormon in a lineup is a real thing, and it seems to be, that such says nothing about the capacity of those with the light in their eyes to commit horrendous crimes, to lie and deceive, and to carry out horrific instances of abuse, challenging the notion that physical appearance has anything to do with moral character. So, what do you think? I thought it was quite an interesting statistic that Mormons could get picked out with a 60% accuracy, and that the study noted that it was skin texture or skin, whatever it was it said. And I certainly know, like, again, Mormons don't have tattoos. That's an easy giveaway. Mormons aren't drinking and smoking. So I think there's some maybe shade of skin color that sort of is affected a little bit by some of that stuff if you're not as healthy. But also, as the content creator Alyssa pointed out, that there is sort of a limited gene pool. If Mormons are only marrying Mormons, then, the only new genes that come into the pool is if there's converts happening. And we all know that converts aren't occurring at near the rate of the total membership of the church. It's a small little addition. And so I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are on her idea that it is a limited gene pool, and what Ward Radio and the Deseret News wants to say, which is it's more of like the obedience to the commandments, not getting tattoos, not smoking or drinking, that's what affects it. And then maybe your 2 cents on my point of view, which it doesn't matter. What does matter is it actually is real that Mormons can be pointed out, and that nothing has to do with one's countenance having the Holy Ghost, because those people are committing atrocious crimes all the time. RFM.
Okay, couple thoughts. First off is this. I think the question is asking, how much is nature versus how much is nurture? And whereas I think in some instances, yeah, you could say they look like, yeah, they're Mormons because they're Nordic and they have blue eyes and, the clear complexion and beaming. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of Nordic influx into Mormonism, but that's not the end of the story. I tend to think that there's at least a portion of this that has to do with the fact that Mormons are taught that you're the only people who are happy on the face of the earth, because only in Mormonism can you be truly happy. Everybody else has this fake happiness. So you need to slap this fake happy smile on your face wherever you go. So people look at you and say, hey, you're happy. How come you're so happy? And you can tell them about Mormonism and get them baptized so they can be happy like you. I think that has something to do with it. Now, I'm going to tell you the story, okay, which is actually going to link this story with your story, Rebecca. All right. So I am back from my mission. I'm 22. I am auditioning for this musical down in Austin. It's citywide. I'm all excited about it. And I've got my jazz pants on. I've got my T-shirt on. I got my jazz shoes on. I've just done a great audition. I did pretty good. I'm also wearing my garments at this time, right? But they're completely covered up by the shirt. I'm being chaste. I'm being modest, but I'm also being faithful because I'm sweating like a pig. So anyway, I go up on the stage after this and I'm wiping myself down with the towel. This other guy, I don't know anybody there. I'm the new kid in town. And here comes this guy. His name ends up being Rusty, right? And what I don't know about him is that he's an inactive member of the church. He's a super nice guy, Rusty. But I don't know who he is. So I'm standing up on the stage. He comes up and he looks at me. Very first words out of his mouth. We've never met. And he says, hi, I hope you don't mind my asking, but are you Mormon? And immediately the thought runs through my mind, oh my gosh, he can see the light coming from my face. He can see it beaming from my countenance and my eyes. And so I try to say as humbly as I possibly can, because I know what the answer is going to be. Why, yes, I am. How did you know? And Rusty looks at me and he says, well, Mormons are the only people I know who wear T-shirts under T-shirts.
Right. Costly signaling.
True story.
Yeah. Rebecca, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's truth to that. Of course, if you go to Disneyland or SeaWorld or some kind of amusement park and it's hot, you can always spot the Mormons. They're the only ones that have sleeves that come to here and shorts that come down below the knee. Of course, you can spot that. So there's definitely the health code and the dress code. But yeah, I was very interested in what you said about countenance. I like to call that the "We love you, Brother Bundy syndrome." Because I don't know if everyone knows, but of course, famed serial killer Ted Bundy was for a time a Mormon, and he was in a ward when he was arrested, I think, for the first time. And the ward rallied around Brother Bundy because his countenance said he was a great guy. And there's a giant poster that the ward made for him. "We love you, Brother Bundy," and it has pictures all over it and signatures, because they couldn't tell from his countenance and the light in his eyes what he was really doing. Once on Ex-Mormon Reddit, I made a post. It was my most successful one ever. And I said, "Don't these two have lovely countenances?" And it was a picture of a husband and wife smiling. And I said, just a few years later, they would go on to kidnap Elizabeth Smart. And it was Wanda Barzee and it was David Bryan Mitchell. But from their picture, they looked amazing. They looked, they were wearing Wanda's clothing. They had a smile. They had a light in their eyes. So as you say, Bill, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. However, it's often used against people that have stepped away from the church. I think we've all heard this many times. The light has gone out of your eyes. Can't you see on their countenance now, how unhappy they are? And it's very subjective. That's all. I think of recent posts with David Archuleta, of course, and he does look very different than he did a year or so ago when he was doing gigs for the church and he was more active in the church. And you read some of the comments and sometimes they say, "Oh, look at him now," but I look at him and I see a real person, where before I saw somebody that maybe didn't look so happy and maybe, had another life that he was meant to go live. So I don't know. It's, again, it's very subjective and it's open to interpretation, but I feel like, and I'm in the heart of the Utah County. So of course I always assume everybody's a Mormon, but there's definitely a look and a demographic. And it can't just be that everybody uses the same, Botox facade. Yeah, I'm kidding, of course. But it is interesting. What do you think, Bill? Honestly, is there a skin texture? I thought that was the strangest one because I don't know how you would really gauge that.
I think that, I'm sorry, my dog's back there barking.
You're cute puppy.
I think if you were to line up 100 people, I could take a pretty educated guess at who the Latter-day Saints are. Yeah. And I think it's partly what RFM said, which is there's going to be a certain fakeness to the happiness of some of those folks, but they're going to be clean cut, of course, no tattoos. There's just going to be certain things. Just again, the shorts running below the knee would be a dead giveaway. But I think I could, with a decent amount of accuracy, again, not necessarily 80% or something, but 60% is statistically significant. I think I could do that for those reasons. Again, no beard, by the way. Mormons are taught that no facial hair. So the men are going to be, for the most part, clean shaven. I think there's ways to do it, and I think it has nothing to do with righteousness. And the moment a Mormon argues that it has something to do with righteousness, there are 1,000 examples of Mormons who got fooled by other Mormons who were leading completely corrupt lives, including the leaders of the church who make up, fabricate, and embellish stories continually. So, anything else?
And including all the people with who sell people in Utah on their affinity fraud schemes and their stake presidents and whatever, and they're so righteous that they buy in, they mortgage the house, they put 2 mortgages on the house, they go all in because this guy is righteous because of his position, because of his possessions, and because of his countenance.
Yeah. By the way, did you notice that one of the pictures, Joseph Bishop was the front center one at the end? But did you notice Thomas Monson Jr. over to the side?
I did, actually.
Yeah.
He was looking down. He seems
it's an interesting story, folks. You ought to Google it. Yeah. Mrs. Bottomley. That's the other word you'll want to use, is Bottomley, as you do that search. But anyway, great stories tonight. I really appreciate it. By the way, I made a mistake early on. I mentioned the Las Vegas temple because they're dealing with the same sort of issue. And I thought this was an update on their situation. It seems like the church is building temples nobody wants in their area all over the country at this moment in time. And so I think it was great, RFM, for you to help us see the trick that's being played so that the folks in those communities can at least have a heads up. And Rebecca, I think that garments are one of the mainstays of how Mormons demonstrate that they are in on the faith. And I think while this story has sort of run for a month, I think it's really important to Latter-day Saints and those out of the faith to understand the updates of what's going on there. So I appreciate both of you. Rebecca, what's going on in the upcoming week or so with the Mormonish podcast?
Oh, let's see. On Mormonish at 6 p.m. Mountain Time Tuesday night, we have an episode about the Granite Mountain Vault, the secret, super secure, one of the top 10 most secure locations on the planet. I'm not kidding. That the LDS Church owns, and what is in that. We are talking to a former employee. So that'll be really interesting. Also, along the lines of temples, I just got invited on Sunday to go on Nemo the Mormons podcast to talk about all 4 temples at once, because that's important. It's the big story of what the LDS Church is doing in the playbook in all 4 places: Heber, Cody, Lone Mountain, and McKinney. So that's at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. That should be pretty interesting to dissect that with Nemo the Mormon.
Awesome. And Radio Free Mormon, what do you have going on, my friend?
Well, this Wednesday, 2 nights from tonight, we're going to, on Mormonism Live, have as a guest Lars Nielsen, who has just written an exciting and provocative and controversial new book positing a different way than anybody has come up with before as to how it was that the Book of Mormon was composed and written and came to pass.
Yeah. Awesome. And over on the Mormon discussion side, we just released a video this week that was the top 10 evidences that the Book of Mormon is not true. It's under an hour, and I think it shares, it says 10, there's actually 11, but within those 11 are just multiple points in each issue. I think, folks, if you're looking for something that can very quickly give you the entire gamut of the problems with the LDS Church's truth claims, we put that video out, and then we broke them out into 11 shorts as well. So each of them are available independently also. And then behind the scenes, we're working on, really quickly, we're working on an interview about Joseph Smith's polygamy. We've been talking with Clark Abood, who posits that Joseph Smith is not the originator of polygamy. And now I'm in the midst, I've already got those 2 episodes recorded. Now I'm in the midst of working with Dan Vogel to create a response. And I will mesh those 2 together so that as you watch Clark Abood, you'll see Dan Vogel come on the screen and have a chance to rebut why he doesn't see the evidence as strong that Clark is pointing to. And so that's upcoming as well. I appreciate, again, both of you. To the audience, thank you so much for joining us here at the Mormon Newscast. And hopefully, Mormonism, as it always does anyway, will do some exciting things this week. And we will see you next Monday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time with the Mormon Newscast, and we'll see what's happening in Mormonism then. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.